right, so caging results for April across, we have Aegis processing and more RMG now. And both of them are showing that April was down year over year. Aegis was down 8% on revenue and 6% on the number of donors. More RMG down 14% on revenue and 10% on the number of donors. And this is also showing slight decreases in average gift, which is a bit surprising, but some of that may be just that last April we had that large jump up in average gift that we're seeing around this time. So not great results in mail only, but again, this is also a mix of acquisition and donor mailings. So it's tough to determine from a caging point of view what went into this last during the time. My anticipation is probably were, as we'll see in some of the fundraising effectiveness project results. Any questions on that before we go over to FEP? Okay, hearing none. 2022 results. Now these, I should stress that fundraising effectiveness project tends towards smaller organizations. Their large organizations are 25 million in revenue and above. That's only a smaller portion of their file. So their large organizations are probably represented by the smaller organizations on this call. But it's always good to see their results, and they do jive fairly closely with what we were seeing, although a bit harder for smaller organizations last year. Generally, the results were like we thought, down 10% on the number of donors last year, down 2% on dollars. So there was an average gift jump in 2022, as we've talked about on these calls, and retention was down overall. And the retention rate is not just file makeup. It's not just, hey, we had a bunch of donors, and so a bunch of new donors coming in 2020 and 2021. Retention is down across life cycle segments, which, as we'll talk about later, is worrying. Worst among smaller donors, the donors that we deal with most often, your major donors, your 5K plus, had a smaller drawback. It was really among the under $100 donors. Honestly, the place that I'd be in most cases, it was down the most. From a life cycle perspective, the core largely remains. The repeat retained donors down only 2%. A large part of that is probably because increase in new donors in 2020 have the chance to be new retained donors in 2021 and repeat retained donors in 2022. So that meal is moving through the snake, as it were. But worrying are the number of new retained donors, almost kind of obviously down because there's a drop from that moving through the snake, but the new donors down by 18%. We didn't acquire as many new donors last year, which means we'll have fewer new retained donors next year, which means we'll have a drop in repeat retained donors the year after that. And so that we see a downsizing of file sizes kind of across the board here. Now, the good news, and there is some, is that this is still kind of a bump in the road compared with what we saw in 2020, 2021, drop of less than 5%. When you look at what we saw in 2020, we're coming down from highs rather than setting up new lows, thank goodness. On retention, however, we're setting up new lows. And you saw retention going down and down and down and down, really for the decade before going into the pandemic. The 2019 retention up number is because, hey, a lot of people donated in 2020 and more people retained than normally would have. But we're back to that trend. And just like it's important when in your 20s and 30s to invest in your retirement because, hey, compound interest is going to do its magic over time. This is the reverse of that. Our compound interest is going down. Our percentage of retention is going down. And so file sizes you're going to see continue to drop unless we act. And that's why we keep we beat the drum for customization, personalization, making sure that we're relevant and doing so across channels, just like our for-profit competitors are doing. Any questions on the FEP data? Any comments? Does this feel like 2022 to you? Seeing nods. Don't worry, you don't have to go on record in the audio if you would prefer not to. But I know this has been troubling for some folks and troubling for me. It is in a lot of ways coming back to eliminating the asterisk, so to speak. We're coming back to our pre-pandemic trends of fewer donors, higher average gifts, but that is not a sustainable model. As one of the things I'm fond of saying is that every day, unfortunately, donors pass away, and every day new non-donors are very infrequently does a baby enter the world with a donation in their hand. And so it's incumbent upon us to convert new people to philanthropy over time. Candidly, we're not being helped by our friends. Oh, do we think this means we need to sharpen our acquisition between getting bodies in the door to acquiring fewer but more qualified donors from the start? I think that's not necessarily an either or, but a yes and. Definitely don't want to think of just bodies in the door. One of the things that we talk about is and evangelize for is new models allow us to say at the point of acquisition, here's what a person's value is going to be over the long term. We don't have to wait 2 years out to say, hey, that group of donors had a really low cost to acquire, and we got what we paid for because those donors don't retain over time. You can look at that and say, these are the lists that, yes, I might be paying more to acquire those donors, but they're going to be worth so much more. And so getting bodies in the door isn't necessarily a good strategy. I don't know. I would say that it may not be a matter of acquiring fewer donors, but thinking about the way, although that can be a consequence of this, but thinking about the ways that we multi-track or customize going in. I'm thinking of, and a simple example is premium versus non-premium. You know, if your donor file is getting premiums all the time, and you acquire on a premium and you test a non-premium package that works, great, but those donors are not likely to react well once they get into the donor stream if they're getting labels and calendar and coin and check and all of those things coming down the pipe. I speak as one who has basically shoved every type of premium one can shove into an envelope in my career, working at Mothers Against Drunk Driving and now on the agency side. So no shade against premiums for those who have those types of files. It's tough to make that transition though, because as you acquire, so must you retain by and large. Now, in your thinking, I would also replace that with any other variable. So if you have a successful campaign that brings in younger donors, are those younger donors going to have the same reactions to your donor file and your donor mailings as the thing that brought them in? As we've talked about on previous of these calls, it may be that these younger donors are more likely to transact online. They're not necessarily digital donors, they're digital transacting, but influenced by the mail. How do you treat them differently? Is it with QR codes and things like that? If you make a concerted effort to go into Hispanic audiences or African American audiences with cultivated, thoughtful acquisition pieces, that's great. And you need to keep up that customization and personalization in your donor file as well. And so, yes, you want to get in those more qualified donors, but it may not be acquiring fewer, but acquiring in more different ways and continuing that treatment through as time goes on and as you look through channels. The challenge that we could face as retention goes down and donor files go down is giving is a habit, not giving is also a habit. And so we want to build those habits in, we want to build them in early, we want to create the philanthropists of the future so that decades from now, we aren't all fighting over the same one donor that's left. And darned if USPS isn't making it harder. Postal rate change just went through the Board of Governors. They've met on it. They're going to do the adjustments as of July 9th, assuming that court cases don't stop them, which in my humble opinion, they should, because Postal Service isn't authorized to do beyond inflationary increases, except in extraordinary circumstances. And the USPS is treating extraordinary circumstances as Tuesday. Tuesday is not an extraordinary circumstance. So what does it mean across the board? First class mail, the mailed back, the stamps that you buy are going to go up 5.4%. Your forever stamps are going to go up about 5%. Pre-sorted automated is going to go up an average of 6%. Not a lot. That's a 32% increase since 2019. Obviously, inflation hasn't gone up that fast, but that's nothing compared to what they're doing to nonprofits. And so nonprofit marketing mail auto letters are going up an average of 10%, and nonprofit mail flats are going up 9%. Now, your rates will vary because hopefully you're commingling because to get the best possible rates. And so it'll fluctuate a little bit, but that 10% is a good baseline to draw from. And then the flats are things like calendar mailings. And so those things, there's still going to be a pound rate charge that will go up over it. If you're at 7 ounces and doing 5-digit, you're going to see a 13% increase. And so on things like a calendar mailing in this calendar year, you're going to face an increase of 19 to 34%. And so going back to Kathy's question in the chat, do we need to look at having fewer but more qualified, higher value donors to begin with? Possibly, if we're getting priced out of acquiring lower value kind of tipper donors. And that's a pity, because the tipper donors are now, ASPCA did this test, 15 years ago now, but they were like, we don't want these tippers. We don't want the $5 to $10 donors. And then they saw down the stream, their plan giving donors gifts dried up 5 to 10 years later, because those people who were tipping now were those plan givers of the future. And they weren't people who were extraordinarily wealthy. They were people who built up a lot of savings over the years by only donating $5 at a time. And so that's the peril of a smaller strategy, but totally understand that we're being priced into that to some extent. Question in the chat, I'm thinking more about targeting our messaging better using mission-centric premiums, if any, versus mailing fewer, making our acquisition messages appealing specifically to people who are likely to stay, instead of going as broad as possible with messaging incentives. I think that's likely the way to go. We did see in 2022, and we're working to put these results into a usable and releasable form as we speak. I know I've been saying that for a couple of months, but hopefully it will be coming very soon. But what we saw was that people who were using more mission-centric messaging tended to do a little bit better in challenging times, because there are the people who are giving to the organization, passionate about the mission, not necessarily passionate about the labels that they were getting, or the calendar, or the premiums that go into it. The other part of it is that if you can go deeper with personalization and customization within that to say, here's the reason why these people are giving to our mission, whether that's a disease charity saying, I am going to talk about the fact that this is a disease that you have versus a disease that you're caring for someone with versus a member of the general public. That type of customization, personalization can do wonders. Customizing to former volunteers, customizing to, I want my donation to go internationally versus domestically versus local. Those sorts of customizations can all bear fruit. And because the costs of mail are going up, to Kathy's point in the chat, because these costs are going up, we have to get more out of each package. And so that's customization and personalization within the package. and it's going wide with omni-channel messaging so that you are getting those, whatever you believe, 7, 9, however many impressions the study that you believe in thinks is necessary. We all know that it's an average, not necessarily, okay, I've hit 8 and therefore the person's going to donate, but building up those touch points that build frequency, that build liking, that make someone likely to give, can be very helpful and help you get the most out of each channel. So I think you're thinking exactly along the right way here.
Melissa and Martinez, real quick. Has there been any discussion around USPS like SLAs and deliverability guarantees? Because I know all that changed. What was that, about a year ago, 18 months ago? And now with the rates going up, I didn't know. I know they won't go back to what they were, because of course they won't, but I didn't know if they were going to make any other changes. And part of the reason why I ask is we're seeing wild variability in the number of days it's taking for things to get in home and then back to the cager. And it just doesn't seem to be as reliable as it used to be.
Yeah. And you would think that how it used to be is a lowered bar over which they could step. I remember getting a call from a distribution center saying that they discovered 10,000 mail pieces in sacks, and did I still want them delivered like 7 months later? And it's like, well, hopefully they've gotten another membership card by now, but I mean, I guess, are you going to reimburse me for the cost of mail, that sort of thing? I don't know that there have been better guarantees. Let me check with our production solutions folks on that, or that there's talk of it. I do know that during when there was an extreme focus on packages, and this is, I'm thinking like the winter of 2021, when deliverability just went to pot. I know we've bounced back from them, but let me get better data from our production solutions folks to see where we are. USPS is really, there are basically 4 strategies that one can take. You can have lower prices and better service. That's the ideal. You can do lower prices and worse service, and that's can be successful. That's the McDonald's of the world. You can have higher prices but better service. That you don't buy Tiffany's or a Birkenback because of the low price. USPS is going with the 4th strategy: higher prices, worse service. Can't say that I've ever seen that work, but hey, the industrialized economy has only been around for 200 years, so what do we know? One of the things that the USPS has said as a part of this is, these types of rate increases won't impact mailing rates. And we talked a little bit about this last month, because people are insensitive to price for postage, as opposed to everything else on earth. And that what they weren't factoring in is they had only done the price increases that they were supposed to do up until now. And it's like, yes, if you're raising along with inflation, things will generally go, price elasticity won't, you're relatively price sensitive because the price isn't changing for you. But when you're going up 7% to 9%, as they're looking at doing 2024 on flats, packages, parcels, that's, a 17% increase once you compound it. That is going to cause volume to go down, and we're already seeing it. Mail volume has gone down because of these significant increases in prices. You look at the marketing, the red line, the marketing mail, flat shaped. Yes, there was a drop down in pandemic, and unlike everything else, it didn't recover. 2021, people mailed less in marketing mail and less the year after that. Now, marketing mail letters did go up a little bit, but that's in part because they haven't seen quite the price increases that flats have, as you saw in the previous slides. So you are seeing this volume decline kind of across the board. So Melissa, let me check into your specific question about if there are looking at quality guarantees. I haven't heard anything about it. But at the very least, I can get some numbers for you on how we're seeing deliverability over to you. So one of the ways that we can fight this is the USPS promotions are growing. They're increasing the timeframes, they're increasing the discounts. And so we can cut back on some of the price increases by using things like the tactile and sensory promotions, using emerging technology like QR codes, going with informed delivery. And so the promotions calendar, you can see here, it's also up on the Production Solutions site, and they are proposing longer timeframes, as you can see, for 2024. Emerging technology, they are basically doing the promotion throughout the year as it's proposed right now. And so taking advantage of those increased timeframes, decreased costs will help defray some, but obviously not all of this. And unlike their price increases, these don't compound. So there's the challenge. Any questions before we talk digital? Okay, so Deloitte conducts every year a survey of 2,000 US consumers. This is all November 2022 data. All of it's weighted to consensus data so that they can have equal balances here, but it's how people are using digital media trends. They also, I should note, use different generation markers than most people. And so they look at millennials as starting in 1983. Most folks look at either 1980, 1981. So they're looking, when they say millennial and Gen Z, they're looking at people 40 and under is the way to look at that. And that's going to be an interesting line to look at here, because those people 40 and under, the majority of people 40 and under say, if an online creator has reviewed a product, I'm more likely to engage with it. I don't mind advertisers from my content creators, and I believe that product reviews there are more authentic than brand advertisements. So younger people are engaging with influencing content creators and the brands that sponsor them. You can also see greater affinity for user-generated content, these type of content creators. Gen Z and millennials are more likely to agree with all of the different reasons to watch user-generated content. Gen X actually not far behind. So younger people, by and large, are more willing to engage with this type of content and regard it, trust it, those sorts of things. Did I have a question? I put this in there mainly to say, look at your design when you're doing graphs, because this is nigh unreadable in my mind. So we're going to skip this one and go to the next one. One of the things that we're seeing are that millennials and younger are more likely to churn in return on our streaming services. This is the challenge with trying to go just to Hulu or just to, God, I was going to say Quibi. That dates me already. Freevee and those sorts of going directly to service and trying to sponsor there. You're going to get a rotating door of who's coming in, who's coming out. Much better to use a connected TV service that is going to all of the services and trying to find a particular person at the price you want to reach them. These are largely economic driven. People are changing their subscriptions as a result of economic conditions. I'm also hypothesizing there. You may say, okay, I'm going to get Paramount Plus for 1 month. I'm going to watch all the Star Trek content that I want, and then I'm going to come off of the service. I might know people like that, let's say, who say, oh, this streaming service is good for one thing, and let's use that and leave. We're also seeing among younger audiences, you hear me preach about omni-channel, you're seeing people who watch shows because they hear about it on social media, people who play video games and discover new music there, finding new artists through social media, all of these sorts of things. It's when we use a channel mindset, we are nixing out the increasing reality that people are living in a channel agnostic world. They're getting influenced by one thing and going to another consistently. Any questions on any of that?
That's fucking heartbreaking. Settle.
What did you do?
Nothing.
So on to those who need to drop. This is the nonsense segment in Potpourri. The deadliest animal on Earth isn't the shark. It's not the lion. For humans, it is the mosquito. There were over 600,000 malarial deaths last year. It's most common in sub-Saharan Africa, where it causes more than 100,000 deaths per year. Majority of those are for kids under the age of 5. And so I'm so happy to report that Nigeria and Ghana have both approved the Oxford vaccine for malaria, and maybe we can lick that darn mosquito and its malarial passing ways. There are still obviously other mosquito pathogens, but would be a great boon to life on Earth. For some reason, I got 2 different plaque-related bits of humor recently. So this first one is Toronto's Recursive History Project, where they talk about how plaques like this one are an integral plaque. Part of the campaign to support more plaques like this one. By reading this plaque, you have added to the number of people reading this plaque. So yay to that. And then also the XKCD on May 5th was this cartoon that I wanted to share. In talking with our Heartland and Trost marketing people and presenting this to them, they can verify that these type of commemorative plaques are not that expensive. So if you do want to order them for their building and things like that, they're well open to doing it. I should also mention, as we talk about influencers, if you do need help with your influencer marketing, if you go to our white paper section, we have a free white paper on influencer marketing, how you can engage with it. Hopefully that's helpful to you. Also, we have a team ready to answer any questions you have about wanting to enter into that market. Thank you, Joey, for putting that into the chat. And while we're talking about education, we have a webinar coming up a week from today. Metrics that matter, about how to create dashboards that drive impact. Back when I was doing direct marketing for a nonprofit, you got your results once a week, and you could occasionally go into the Cager and get results more directly. But we live in a world where we don't want to create a weekly report for our bosses. We want to give them a link and say, here is the dashboard, go to that. You also want to be able to set up a dashboard that has meaning for you, the tripwires for you. And so if you're creating a dashboard, put on there, hey, what is the cost per acquisition of our newly acquired donors versus our lapsed donors? And what's the average gift? And if I'm paying less to acquire lapsed donors and their average gift is higher and their retention is higher, as I often see happen, maybe I need to invest more in reacquiring lapsed donors than on new donors. Those types of things, those types of metrics, those tripwires, being able to see those every day is super valuable. And so I'm so glad that Chris Hubbard's going to be presenting that next week.